Hello again, my little painting family. Welcome back to Painting with Papa. Today I want to talk to you about brushes. Now, of course, brushes used to be made from natural hair. The hair came from animals like oxen or badgers or camels or squirrels or civets, all sorts of different animals. No, sorry Rory, you can't use tiger hair for brushes. So these are the brushes that I used to use for painting with oils. As you can see, some of them are looking a little bit worn, a bit like myself really. That's only to be expected because many of these brushes are well over 40 years old and maybe even 50 years old. And that's a long time to be using brushes. And these are the new brushes that I use for painting with acrylics. As you can see, I've got quite a few brushes in different sizes and in different shapes. So let's talk about why we have different brushes like this. Just imagine if I was to paint a whole picture using a brush of this size. It would take absolutely forever, especially if the picture was large. It won't make any sense at all. For a large painting, I need a bigger brush, like this one. This one will cover a whole canvas in a fraction of the time that the thin one will do. And sometimes you can go even bigger and use a brush like this, which is more like a house painting brush. That will be used to cover a canvas in initial stages of painting. Now let's talk about shape. The most popular brush for young people is probably the round brush, like this one. But equally we can use flat brushes, like this one, which will cover the areas quicker and will also give us different shape marks. The third brush in my hand is this one, which is called a filbert. As you can see, it's like a flat brush with a rounded end. It makes a different mark altogether to the flat brush. It's one which I particularly like because it's capable of making all sorts of different marks on the canvas. Let's start with the round brush. As you can see, the round brush can make some very sharp, crisp lines. At the same time, if we put the brush further onto the paper, push it, we can make broader strokes like this. Now let's look at the square brush, the flat brush. If we use that, you can see we can make marks that are crisp and sharp at the ends. We can also use the brush and we can twist it and make wavy marks. Now the longer flat brush makes marks which are softer. At the same time, we can paint for much longer with the long brush because it holds more paint. This one is the filbert, the one that's like a flat brush but with a rounded end. It makes marks which look very similar to the flat brush, but the ends of the marks, instead of being square, are now round. They're softer. The Egbert makes a very similar mark to the filbert, but can paint for even longer still. So, if I'm painting something which is like a building, which has got square corners, I would definitely use a flat brush, because I can paint sharp corners with that brush. If I'm painting fine detail, or if I'm painting something which is softer, like for example maybe a tree, I would use the round brush. Or perhaps better still, I'd use the filbert. And now for probably the most important part of today's lesson. What we have to do when we finish painting is to clean our brushes properly. Only by cleaning them properly will they last. Those brushes which I showed you, which were 40 years old, have been cleaned every time I've used them. And I've been very, very careful to make sure I clean them properly. I'm going to show you how you do that. First of all, of course, with acrylic paint, we rinse them with water. That way we get rid of most of the paint that's in the brush. Of course, if I was painting in oils, I wouldn't do this. I would use a solvent like turpentine to clean the brushes. Okay, so now the brushes are mostly clean. So what I do, I put a little bit of soap into the palm of my hand. And I take the brush and I rub it gently into the palm of my hand until I can see the soap is nice and clean. Rinse. Rinse the brush. A bit more soap. And yeah, you can see that brush is now nice and clean. I'll continue now and wash all the other brushes until they're all nice and clean, and then I'll leave them to dry. Now when you leave brushes to dry, the temptation is to put them into a jar with the handles pointing downwards like that. But that's not good, because the water is now going to soak into the glue which is holding the hairs into the brush, and over time it will soften it and the hairs will start to fall out. So we always dry brushes lying down like that. That way they'll dry without the water running into the glue, into the ferrule, and our brushes will last a lot longer. Okay, so just to recap, When we're painting, we have brushes of different sizes. We have small brushes for painting detail and for small areas, and we have bigger brushes for painting background or larger areas. We also have brushes in different shapes. The first shape I showed you was the round one, like this. The second shape I showed you was a square brush, like this one. I also showed you a square brush which was longer, like this. That's a long square brush. I showed you a brush which I called a filbert. It's got a rounded end. It's like the square brush, but as I say, it has a rounded end. And lastly, I showed you that crazy brush which we call an egbert. That's an egbert. It's like a filbert, but much longer. Right, time for you to do some work, my little chickadees. What I want you to do now is to paint me a picture using different brushes. Use the brushes that are round, that are square, and that maybe, if you've got them, the ones like the filberts with the rounded end. And I want you to use them to make different shape marks on your paper. Try using the brush, first of all, just using the very tip of the brush. That makes a very fine mark. Or using the side of the brush to make a broader mark. Paint whatever you like. It could be abstract. It could be as wild as you please. And it can be in any colours you like. But use those brushes to make different shaped marks. Okay, I will see you again soon.